Hey, happy Sunday, everybody. Hope we all had a wonderful week out there. And we've got a lot to talk about today, including a very potent storm system likely to cross the country throughout the week ahead. And this pattern of these strong storm systems crossing is likely to continue into the rest of October. So, again, very active month ahead. And I imagine this will continue into November and even December as we really start to crank up snow season here for much of the East Coast. So, again, a lot of us are already feeling that very cold fall and even winter-like air for some folks. Back home where I'm from in the upstate of South Carolina, got down near freezing this morning. So again, very cold air for early October. And again, the pattern of these cold shots of air will likely continue. So if you're a fan of fall, very nice pattern ahead. But also we're going to have to get through some kind of rough patches as we take advantage of some of this nicer air. Now, if you haven't already subscribed, definitely consider doing so. And if you like the video, definitely make sure to hit that like button. And of course, share the video with some friends you might have out there that could be interested or potentially even impacted by this weather coming ahead to us in the next week and even after that. So again, very active times ahead. And this winter is also shaping up to be quite an active one as well. So definitely going to want to have a way to get that information as we start getting into the heart of winter. Now, with all that said, let's go ahead and jump into it. We'll start with satellite imagery as we normally do here, and you'll notice here's that big mid-latitude cyclone from former tropical storm Philippe, then turned into post-tropical system Philippe, and then eventually moved here into Canada, and now we just have a big area of cloud cover spinning around this guy, getting some moisture from the Atlantic as well as the Great Lakes. So again, pretty impressive image on satellite. Now, outside of that system where we're seeing that cloud cover and even some precipitation in the northeast and Midwest, we have beautiful clear blue skies for much of the Great Plains and much of the southeast, really tapping in to that really nice clear high pressure that has really set up shop for much of the country this afternoon, and will continue to do so over the next couple of days before again that next storm system begins to work on into the eastern half of the country. So definitely watching out for that. Now, as for current radar imagery and watches and warnings out there, again, most of the precipitation we're seeing is up in the Midwest and Northeast currently. So, again, low pressure kind of centered near Toronto right now. Again, just bringing this, cyclonic flow around it. And with that, being able to, grab some moisture from the Great Lakes region. And because of that, we're actually seeing some pretty widespread showers here for much of the Midwest for places like Chicago, Indianapolis, down towards Louisville, Cincinnati. And then, of course, those places right on the Great Lakes like Cleveland, Ohio, and just south of Buffalo, again, a pretty good band of rain here. Now, for some of those higher elevations here in the Northeast that are seeing this rainfall, you're likely seeing some wet snowflakes mix in there, or maybe just even all-out wet snow, again, for some of those really high elevations. Now, as we kind of move this ahead into the next couple of days, this guy's going to hang around, bringing that wind, that moisture, and that flow off the Great Lakes. Now, if you happen to be watching from Canada, we could expect some very, widespread snow, although very wet snow, over the next day or two here on the south side of this low pressure. So, again, if you're kind of in this band of area that's able to tap into that colder air aloft and bring some of that down to the surface in the form of some snow, definitely could, be able to take advantage of that going through the next couple of days. So we'll definitely watch out for that for you folks up into Canada. Now, as we move this ahead, again, we're going to have a pretty, constant pattern over the next couple of days with this low pressure continuing to bring scattered showers for much of the Midwest and Northeast through the early week here coming up. And we could even see some of that rain make it down here into the Appalachian chain as far south as potentially North Carolina in the form of some good old-fashioned northwest flow precipitation. Now, still too cold down here for that to fall in the way of snow, but definitely could see some much-needed precipitation there on those higher peaks due to that flow out of the northwest. Now, for folks further up north into the mountains of West Virginia, even up into the Poconos and here into sections of New York and New England, some of these higher elevations, as we get into the overnight hours this week, if we continue this northwest flow, we could see some flakes fly there, again, at those higher peaks, thanks to that precipitation being provided here by that flow around the low pressure. But don't expect any kind of travel impacts or anything, or really any accumulation here in the United States. Really just more of good old-fashioned pretty snowflakes if you're lucky enough, but for most of us, really just some rain. Now, again, this pattern will continue through Monday afternoon here. Again, you'll notice we have those showers continuing through much of the Northeast and the Midwest, although, again, not a washout for anybody, just kind of dreary, cloudy, and showery. And then also down here into those higher peaks of the North Carolina and Virginias. So Watching for that. And again, this continues through much of the week ahead before eventually we get into that Wednesday, Thursday timeframe. And that's when we likely get our next storm system to start to kind of begin to work into the country. And we'll talk about this in a second. It's going to be kind of two separate parts of this storm system. One main piece of low pressure coming into the Great Plains, and another system kind of down near the Gulf that will parallel that and could bring some interesting things, we'll just say, going into the week ahead. So with that said, let's go ahead and run you through it. So again, right now we have the low pressure up into Canada as we've been talking about, but as we move this ahead into the middle of this week and later on, this is that next low pressure system. So you'll notice we're going to get some storm system to begin to develop, likely into Colorado, before eventually working into the plains. And while that's ongoing, I'm actually going to bring this map back a little bit. You'll notice we have a piece of energy down here in the Gulf. This is likely going to ride the Gulf of Mexico and kind of through these Gulf states and bringing some rain with it. So for folks in the southeast who have been very dry recently, could be lucky enough to get in on some of that rain, but really you're going to have to be quite close to the Gulf of Mexico to see that rain here through the Florida Panhandle, southern Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas, likely having the greatest chance of seeing that rain. And again, the timing on that is likely going to be through our Wednesday afternoon, potentially starting in Texas as early as Tuesday overnight into Wednesday afternoon, again riding those Gulf Coast states before eventually moving out of the picture. But as that piece moves out of the picture, our storm in the Midwest begins to really crank up. So with this big high pressure up here into Canada, or excuse me, low pressure rather, causing flow counterclockwise around that, and with warm air being advected northward due to this high pressure, we're going to get a pretty big area of some precipitation due to those clashing air masses here from Nebraska all the way over through northern Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and even all the way back towards Pennsylvania. So not expecting any severe weather with this section of the storm or any kind of snow, really just good old-fashioned cool, breezy, cloudy fall day with those showers, I really should say, through that section of this storm system. Now, as we move this ahead into Thursday afternoon, the rain continues in those areas, but this storm system really begins to crank up. A 992 millibar low is plenty strong enough to cause some gusty winds and even some pretty impressive things in the atmosphere that could lead to some snow even on the backside of this, outside of the mountains of the Rockies. So people in kind of western Nebraska, western South Dakota could see some snow this week coming up into our Thursday and Friday, as the storm system has a lot of energy with it and could potentially bring down some cooler air from those upper parts of the atmosphere to the surface. Now, as we go into our Friday afternoon, that's when things could get a bit interesting. We'll have to watch for Friday and Saturday the chance of potentially some severe weather. Now, nothing is set into stone right now, but we'll definitely have to watch. We'll have plenty of dew points being raised ahead of this storm system. The big question is, can we get enough clearing or instability? That is really going to be a big question, especially once you start getting into October. It's a little bit more difficult to kind of get that instability, but there will be plenty of wind energy, again, with this storm system, and we'll take a look at that here in just a moment. But as we go into Friday afternoon, this storm system likely over the Midwest and going into Friday overnight and into Saturday, crossing the Ohio River Valley, again bringing with it gusting winds, potentially some severe weather, but big question marks on that part so far. But definitely some rain nonetheless for a lot of folks before eventually crossing the East Coast going into our Saturday and getting off the Northeast Coast going into early the following week. And we'll have to watch for this thing to potentially kind of strengthen as it rides up the Northeast coastline, and could bring some nor'easter-like conditions, although minus the snow part, going into about that 7 to 10 day time period. So definitely watching that in the long run. Alright, so taking a look at this storm system on kind of our velocity or our vorticity map rather, going into next week. Again, this is that big storm system we're dealing with right now. Almost looks like a big eyeball over Canada with, the pupil right here and then kind of the surrounding bits of the eye, on the outside of that. But nonetheless, that just means that there's a lot of energy, and this is a very big storm system and very expansive. And that's why we're seeing cloud cover all the way down into the mid-Atlantic, even though the storm system is all the way up into Canada. Now, as we move this ahead into next week, here comes our next big storm system out of the Rockies, again going into Thursday and Friday, likely over the Great Plains and Midwest region. And as we move this ahead later on into the week, you'll notice it continues to work eastbound through the Midwest and into the Northeast. Now, again, there's going to be a lot of wind energy with this, and that's why I'll be a little bit concerned about some severe weather, as again, it doesn't take too much instability when you have this much wind energy to cause problems. So, again, very strong winds kind of converging into this storm system and then diverging on the outside of it, and that is going to allow the potential for some storms to fire up kind of on the other side of the storm system. And again, with plenty of wind energy, if we get any kind of instability here on this side of the system, we could have problems. So definitely have to watch out for that before, again, eventually this thing kind of phases off the northeast coastline and could bring some nice cooler air behind it once again, much like we saw this past week. Alrighty, so talking a little bit more about the severe weather potential, again, the big question mark is CAPE or instability. How much of it will we have? Well, our latest GFS model, as we move this ahead through this week, you'll notice not really too much to speak of. We do have a couple moments in here that we potentially could see some. Friday afternoon, we could get potentially a thin band of that instability riding up the Mississippi River Valley. That could lead to some severe weather. And then once again on Saturday, again, depending on timing here, we could get another surge of some instability into the Carolinas. So we'll have to watch this. Again, plenty of wind energy here. That I feel confident in. It's, do we get any kind of blow-ups of instability here as the system is crossing the country? And that will really be the big question going into this week. Now, one thing I do think we will have here is the dew points here at the surface to kind of support some severe weather ahead of this storm system. Going into Friday afternoon, you'll notice dew points climbing back up into the 60s and even 70s near the Gulf Coast. So going back later into this week, expect more of that summertime air mass to return once again as the system is crossing the country and bringing that north or that warm and unstable air northward ahead of it before eventually it crosses through, and once again we get another surge of dry air behind it that will once again lead to fall-like temperatures and conditions after the storm system crosses. Now, again, this will be a pretty potent storm system, so winds will definitely be a factor as well going into this week. And even early this week, expect breezy conditions through the Great Lakes region and the Northeast as that Canadian system continues to linger. But next week, again, that next storm system comes, and you'll notice going into our Wednesday and Thursday, very gusty conditions through the plains, potentially getting up near tropical storm force there as this thing really cranks up before continuing to cross through the Ohio River Valley, again bringing with it very gusty winds through the Great Lakes region, the Ohio River Valley, and even into the East Coast and the Mid-Atlantic. By the time we get into our Saturday and Sunday, could see some gusty conditions as well before, again, this storm system finally crosses the country and we kind of begin to clear out a bit. Alrighty, so talking about rainfall a little bit here, again, expecting a lot of rain kind of wherever that band sets up, where these two air masses clash going into the early and middle part of this week, and also kind of through the Gulf Coast where we have that other storm system that we've been talking about. Could get some pretty heavy rainfall there into the Florida Panhandle, down near Galveston, Texas, and into southern Alabama and Georgia as well. Now, the people who might not get so lucky, unfortunately, with the storm system are the ones who really need it, still kind of in this area that has just been so dry the past couple of weeks, kind of in between that northern piece of energy and that southern piece of energy, could be lacking some forcing and therefore lacking some precipitation. But we have time to definitely see how this trends, and that could very well change depending on if we get some thunderstorm formation through this region going into later this week. Now, one thing we do feel confident in is after this thing crosses, once again, cooler than average temperatures behind it. So a good chance at below average temperatures for much of the eastern half of the country going into the next 6 to 10 days after this storm system crosses. And another thing we feel pretty confident in is the chance of potentially the return of some precipitation for much of the East Coast as this system crosses the country, and also potentially another storm system even after that, getting closer to the 10-day mark. So the good news is I do see some more rain on the horizon. The bad news is we might have to deal with some breezy conditions and maybe even some strong storms just due to how strong these storm systems are that are crossing the country, but nothing that we aren't too accustomed to this time of year. As we get into fall and we really start getting those clashes of air masses, just like we see in the spring, really helps to fuel these storm systems, and we get a lot of different kinematic and thermodynamic things to kind of go on in the atmosphere. Alrighty, well, again, hope this video was of use to you on this Sunday, getting you prepared for the week ahead. I'll have another video out for you, hopefully on Tuesday morning. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get one out for you tomorrow. Got a pretty busy day in class, so we'll see. But if I get home in time, then maybe I'll be able to get one out. Just have to kind of wait and play it by ear there. Anyway, though, again, have a great rest of your Sunday, and I will see you all next time.